Welcome to the Bowden Blitz College Football Playoff Edition. I'm Joe Lisi, joined by former National Coach of the Year, Terry Bowden. Coach, the national championship game is set. We saw two semifinal playoff games play out last week. The stage is now set. Indiana, the number one seed, takes on 10th ranked Miami. It should be a fantastic matchup in just about a week. But give me your thoughts about the semifinal playoff games and what we saw play out last weekend.
Well, you had two different games. You had a great game, probably maybe one of the best college football playoff games that we've had in Miami's victory over Ole Miss. I mean, I think the lead changed four times in the fourth quarter with Miami really showing what they had to do, showed they could come back, win in the last seconds. Carson Beck, great finish, scored at the end, won the game by outlasting an Ole Miss team that's been magical this year, whereas Indiana just dominated for a second week in a row. I don't think anybody expected that kind of score. But on the other hand, no one expected Oregon to have a pick six on the opening play, 3 turnovers in the first half, all lead to touchdowns. Game virtually over by halftime because of mistakes by Oregon and how well Indiana is at playing good at all phases of the game, taking advantage of every situation and pulling away. So I do think it's a good matchup. I do think Miami is the most talent playing the best at the end of the season. And I think it's the right time for Miami to play for a championship against clearly the team most people feel is favored for the national championship.
And we saw that line open up at 5.5 prior to Indiana's victory in dominating fashion over Oregon. We saw 7.5s creep into the market leading up to the game, and we will see, I'm sure, more line movement as we inch closer to January 19th, the start of that national championship game. But from the coaching perspective, what did you see out of both losses? Maybe, Golding and Charlie Weiss and the loss to Miami, and obviously Oregon's blowout loss to Indiana. Would you have done anything differently at any key point during the game? I mean, I think it's clear Indiana was head and shoulders the better team, but would you have changed anything from a game plan perspective in each one of those games?
Well, it's hard to say, and we'll go to Oregon first because you don't expect them to turn the ball over like they did so early. And when you're playing from behind, you like they were so fast, you can't really predict, say, I'm going to do this. You've got to go find a way to win. You've got to throw it more than you want. You've got to abandon a little bit of the running game, and you really never had a chance to use your game plan. So I don't know that Oregon got in a situation. They were without their top running backs. They didn't have a running game like they needed to have. The turning the ball over was too much. And, of course, Indiana is so solid at every phase of their game. They don't throw it too much. They just throw it for touchdowns, and when they have to, they're going to run the ball. They did again. And so in that game, I think Oregon, they just played their worst game, I think, at the wrong time, turnovers being the biggest factor in a game like this. And Miami, I thought Miami played their best game. I mean, that game for the first 3 quarters, it was a pretty dominant Miami game. The time of possession was 41.5 minutes to 18.5. They had the ball. They made almost every third down, almost 55% of their third downs. They never came off the field. Give credit to Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss. They came back at the end, could have won the game. But then I think Miami showed what they had to show if they're going to be a championship team or have a championship game. They came back with a minute or so left in the game, drove the length of the field with Carson Beck scoring with seconds left in the game. So I think we saw Miami dominate most of the game, but then had to come back and show they had something deep inside to come back and drive that ball down the field to win on the last series of the game.
I think you laid out the game plan for the Hurricanes. They didn't want to go maybe blow for blow with a more up-tempo, more explosive offense and a team that quite frankly had maybe the quarterback advantage, Chambliss over Carson Beck. Carson Beck did step up, have some big throws. The wide open shot to Marion in the first quarter or first half of that game really set the tone that Miami was there and potentially going to be in that game from start to finish. But it's how they dictated the tempo.
Right.
They relied on their offensive line. They relied on the rushing attack of both Jamari Brown and Fletcher, the running backs, to wear down maybe a smaller defensive front where Ole Miss couldn't get into a groove until really late in the third quarter. That's where that offense seemed to start to find their way. And obviously, Trinidad Chambliss and the Ole Miss Rebels did have the lead with about 3 minutes left in that matchup. Did you see enough, Coach, out of Carson Beck in that matchup to say that now he's really coming to his own? He's erased all the doubts. He stepped up. He got the game-winning touchdown. He was able to lead his team on a final drive. We knew about the experience. He put it all together in that 31-27 win against the Rebels.
Oh, I think he did. I think there was one interception, but if you remember, the ball was deflected at the defensive line of scrimmage, and it bounced into the defensive hands. It wasn't a bad pass or a bad throw or bad judgment. So he was playing flawless football. Incredibly, they were well over 50% on third downs. You couldn't get him off the field. He hit every third down pass he had to hit. He hit. Phenomenal job. They were well over 50%. And they held Ole Miss to 2 for 10 on third downs. Like I've said, they did a great job, run the football, make third downs. In fact, they were 2 for 2 on fourth downs, and they kept Trinidad Chambliss off the game. It was 88 plays to 60 right there. That was their game plan. Slow it down, control the ball, run the ball. Fletcher had 100. He had 133 yards. He had, and they led the game in rushing. I will say this: it looks like Ole Miss had a big day running, but 73 of those yards came on one play. They only got 47 yards rushing the rest of the game. And so it was really Miami playing the kind of game they wanted to play to win the game.
It was, and Keelan Marion really stepped up. We know about Malachi Toney. We know about C.J. Daniels. He was the third option potentially in that offense, was wide open, not just with respect to the big touchdown catch, but down on the final drive, he was really the security blanket for Carson Beck, and that's really what opened things up, put them in a position inside the red zone and inside the 10-yard line for Beck to score the game-winning touchdown. When you look at this matchup, the Miami wide receivers, we think about speed, we think about taking the top off opposing secondaries. Do you feel they have an advantage going up against Indiana's secondary in this ballgame?
Well, I think they have the talent level to make big plays against Indiana, but Indiana does a great job of playing pass defense. They don't give up big plays. They get they're top number 2 or 3 in sacks. Miami may be number 1 in sacks in the country, but they get great pressure on the quarterback, and so you don't have enough time to throw deep. You know, Carson Beck, their big game plan is to throw the hitch screen, throw the quick jet sweep, get rid of the ball quickly. Not as much downfield throwing. So again, I think Indiana has a secondary that can cause problems and a pass rush that can cause problems. But you can see what Miami wants to do: run the ball and get the ball out of the quarterback's hands as quickly as possible, so they don't get into sacks or long yardage situations.
Yeah, we'll see exactly how Miami handles it. I think when you look at the matchup perspective, and Coach and I will dive into this a little bit later in the show, but Indiana's built to play blue collar. They play it as good as anybody potentially in college football this year. That's why they have the number 1 seed. I think Miami does have to take some shots and at least expose that defense, Coach, in this matchup.
Yeah, the one thing you got to know is that Indiana is about as well prepared as any team we've seen. I've talked to other football coaches. They are well coached, well schooled. You better put in some wrinkles for that next game because they're going to have you scouted so well. They're going to know what you do before you even do it.
More championship talk with Coach Bowden and Joe Lisi coming right back. All right, back on the Bowden Blitz. Joe Lisi and Coach Bowden talking college football playoff semifinal games, along with a preview of the national championship game between the Miami Hurricanes and Indiana Hoosiers. We left off talking about Miami's dominance over Ole Miss. Do want to continue about Dan Lanning and Oregon, Coach. This is back-to-back years. They just haven't lost in the college football playoff. Coach, they've gotten blown out. Through the regular season, we know potentially Dan Lanning is a dominant head coach, but in these spots where his team is coming off multiple weeks in terms of layoff, is it a problem of maybe game plan, or is it a problem of just a hiatus of not playing football?
Well, he came in banged up. He came in without his running backs. He wasn't a complete football team at the end. And again, I mean, he had turnovers. You can't have turnovers. Now, a layoff, but he didn't have a layoff the week before. Had an excellent game the week before against Texas Tech. So you know what? When I look at it, they're disappointed. They're not winning the championship. But Dan Lanning's had his team in the Final 12 2 years in a row. And they were, I thought, a better team this year than they were last year, although they won the Big Ten last year. And they just turned the ball over and made mistakes. Now, I think he's got to look at that and not get – they just got to continue to build, because I still think when you look at the season overall, although they didn't do well in the playoffs again, or they didn't do well enough to get to the championship game, they played pretty good. They got to a semifinal game with probably the number one team in the country, and then he got after him. And I'm going to say this. People say, well, what's going to happen in the future? Every single team in the Big Ten is going to spend several months working on Indiana. Because if you don't beat Indiana, you don't win the Big Ten. They're going to get everybody's – it's like Nick Saban in Alabama. They now, after 2 years, they're going to get Oregon's best game. They're going to get everybody's best game. And I think Dan Lanning's, he's 51, 52 years old. He's going to get better. I'm sorry, he's 39 years old. He's going to get better every year as a young coach, taking his team already 2 years in a row to the Final 12.
Yeah, we have a graphic which shows basically the 5 stars and 4 stars for Indiana, Oregon, Ole Miss, and Miami. And it's quite glaring that Indiana, the number 1 overall seed, doesn't have any 5-star talent, right? Coach Cignetti says that they recruit 3 and 4 stars or 2 and 3 stars, and he coaches them up. He's looking for certain types of attributes in these players that they can actually coach up to a certain level, whereas some of the other coaches just want, the recognizable names and the 5-star talent to plug and play. That's not what Indiana and Kurt Cignetti are doing over the past couple of seasons.
Well, and again, it's funny because I've been watching that, because there's this old saying, do you win with X's and O's, or do you win with Jimmys and Joes? Well, Indiana's all of a sudden, all these other coaches are having to look at Indiana and say, dadgum, they're winning with X's and O's. They're out coaching us. They're doing a better job with less NFL talent. And I think a lot has got to be said for Kurt Cignetti. And there's one big number, 62. That's how old he is. That's how long he's been doing this. I think a lot of the younger guys who go out there and think just by beating other teams on a 4-star, on a 5-star, you forget the fact that this guy's got to fit your system. He's got to fill a need. You've got to be deep at every position. I just think knowing Kurt Cignetti, knowing where he's been, he understands you've got to have guys that fit into your system, that are very smart, great football IQ, and that they help you overall. And so I think he's got the right ingredient. I think he is forcing coaches don't like to give up 55 or 38. DeBoer the same way. He has got everybody's attention, and they're going to think twice with the number of 4- and 5-star players that he has. I think a lot of coaches are going to be looking at their staff, looking at Indiana, and say, what does he know that we don't know? What's he doing that we're not doing? And I think it's going to get back to it. It's not just Jimmy's and Joe's. It's X's and O's too. We've got to do a better job.
Yeah, 2 of the players that we can highlight for Indiana, Coach. One is Kalen Black. He's a dual running back with Roman Hemby, the former Maryland transfer. But Kalen Black is just a physical runner between the tackles. I mean, he runs downhill every time he carries the football, and he really sets a tone and a physicality. Now, I do believe that the offensive line sets that up on how good and how disciplined they are. But when you have running backs, and to Miami's point as well, with Jamari Brown and Mark Fletcher, they are able to set the tone for your offense to really say, we're going to run right at you, try and stop us.
Yeah, I mean, Indiana's a blue-collar football team, and they're not they pass and rush for about the same amount of yardage, but they run the ball a lot more often than they pass it. That's the kind of football team that you want, able to run the ball even though the defense knows that you're likely to run it, and get yourself into short yardage situations or get the one-on-ones. I think we saw one of the keys of their football team in Indiana. They're physically going to run it at you. They're going to force you to load the box, and you got to jump up on those wide receivers tight. And I'm going to say this about Mendoza in that game against Oregon. He may be the best back shoulder thrower I've seen in college football. When you get one-on-one and you got to go deep, he doesn't throw over top. He throws that back shoulder that's almost impossible to stop, and he completes them. So great scheme, very blue-collar. Run the ball first and set up the pass. And then throw great. I mean, they throw great one-on-one routes to the outside.
In watching that game play out against Oregon, right? He gets the football to Elia Surratt, their big play wide receiver that did have 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. Omar Cooper's another big play wide receiver, but Mendoza just seems to be poised. I haven't seen him rattled throughout the regular season, Coach. I think that's the biggest attribute. You can look over the past couple of years with Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels maybe having better physical attributes, but Mendoza just has that calm about him that just showcases why they're the number 1 seed right now.
Well, that's something, if you listen to Kurt Cignetti talk, when they recruit players, especially quarterbacks, they want to know what's between the ears, not what's just in the arm. And I think they do a great job with that. And Mendoza's one of those that just understands how to be a quarterback and how to throw the ball and run the offense effectively. They don't throw the ball very much, but when they do, he completes them and does a great job with it. Again, that's great football IQ. That's knowing how to be a quarterback, and that's where they are so strong this year.
When Coach and I return, we'll take a quick look at the national championship game on January 19th. All right, back on the Bowden Blitz, Joe Lisi and Coach Bowden breaking down all things national championship. Left off talking about Heisman Trophy winner Fernando Mendoza and his success throughout the regular season in Bloomington. We'll take a quick glimpse right now at the updated lines for the national championship game as the week progresses. Coach and I will dive into this game a little bit more in depth. But Coach, right now I mentioned the line open up at 5.5 in favor of Indiana. We're now seeing 8.5s creep into the market. 48.5 is the number. I don't know if we get through the total, but it wouldn't shock me. I still like Indiana early on. Miami wants to play blue-collar physical. That goes right into the strength of Indiana. They do it better than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Miami stays in this football game, it'll be a lower scoring game in the under. But right now, I still lean towards Indiana, maybe being up about a touchdown, but pulling away at the end. Kurt Cignetti does not know how to slow things down. His metal is always to the pedal to the metal. He's always trying to add points. He understands it's never over offensively, and I think that's a big point that you got to look at in favor of Indiana and the way they play. But if you look at the season, I think it's very important that Miami coaches get those kids to watch that Iowa score, 15-10, and that Ohio State scored 13-10, and that Penn State scored 27-24. They didn't blow everybody out every game. You got to mentally get your kids to understand. Go play great football. Go do what you do well. And I will say this: they do a great job of scouting at Indiana. They do a great job of knowing what the other team does. You got 9 days you need to have a few wrinkles. You need to give them. You need to break your tendencies in this championship game. If you're Miami, you got to break a few tendencies.
How much weight do you put in the fact that Miami's at home for this game? Because we talk about coaches and athletes, creatures of habit, they playing in their home stadium. I don't know, because the ticket prices are absolutely ridiculous, Coach. Some prices they say are going for $25,000 per ticket. If that's the case, I don't know how many students will get in. But just looking at this game from a preparation perspective, do you really give an inside track to Mario Cristobal and the Hurricanes playing at home in their own building?
I think I do. I think if I was in this situation, I would feel better with my guys heading to my home field playing in this game. And Indiana's done a great job of bringing more people their opponents in their first two games. And they're going to bring a bunch of people here, but that's a big populated area. Miami is going to have a lot of fans. There are plenty of people with money in Miami, and I think this team will attract those people. So in the balance, I would say I would give that home field edge to Miami, but both teams have shown they can win on the road, and I wouldn't say it's a big factor, but to some extent it is a factor. At least it's not a negative. It's a factor, I think, in favor of Miami, but not a whole lot of points. Just a feel good. I think you play well at home, and I think they'll play better at home.
And we talk about, just turnover margin. Indiana has one of the best turnover margins in the nation, plus 17 after the game. I think they're up to plus 20 in this matchup. I mean, that's unprecedented to be disciplined, to win the turnover battle, to potentially have the best quarterback, have the best offensive line. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's very difficult to overcome. And I think that's why you're seeing 8.5 creep into the market. For years, Coach, Miami was always known as having potentially a speed advantage. Do you give them the speed advantage in this matchup against the Hoosiers?
I think you probably would. I think if they all lined up and did 40-yard dashes against each other, I believe there's more athletic in Miami. They shoot themselves in the foot. They had 10 penalties last week. They made mistakes that could have cost them that football game. So if it comes down to pure athleticism, I don't know that I wouldn't edge Miami. Now this is not a track meet, it's a football game. When it comes to playing football, it's 11 people playing together, 11 people that execute perfectly as a team, great synergy, and that leans so much toward Indiana than Miami. Miami, what they can do is go out there with great pass rush, with a offensive lineman very talented, defensive front can shut down the run. They've got the athletes, and they may have the speed as well. But again, I don't think Indiana necessarily beats you with their speed. They beat you with their fundamentally good football.
Yeah, that game will play out on January 19th. Coach and I will be on later in the week with a full preview of the national championship game. As we said, Indiana significant favorites in this matchup, 8.5-point favorite. 48.5 is the total. We'll see if there's any fluctuation later in the week. For Coach Bowden, I'm Joe Lisi. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you later in the week.